Have you ever wondered which of the long classics are worth your while reading and are books that you are going to enjoy? Well, in this video, we're going to take a look at 10 long classics that are worth your time. Our first great classic is one of the most important novels in all of literature, and it deals with an old gentleman living on a dilapidated estate who reads too many romance novels to the point that he becomes insane and sets out on an idealistic adventure, calling himself a knight-errant to perform great acts of devotion and knightly love to win over his lady Dulcinea, a woman he's never met. And so, setting out on his clapped-out nag of a horse, and with the company of a peasant, Sancho Panza, Don Quixote sets forth on one of the funniest journeys you will ever read in literature. And from this book we get so many great phrases and expressions. To tilt at windmills comes from this book. You can stretch the truth, but you can never break it. It will always lay upon the top of falsehood or on lies, just as oil lays on top of water. That comes from Don Quixote too, and we get the word in English, quixotic, which comes from Quixote, meaning overly idealistic. Let me just read you a section from this book. "Hold you there," quoth Sancho. "Neither a strange hand nor my own, neither heavy nor light, shall touch my bum. What a pox! Did I bring Madame Dulcinea del Toboso into the world, that my hind part should pay for the harm her eyes have done? Let my master Don Quixote whip himself. He's a part of her. He calls her every foot, my life, my soul, my sustenance, my comfort, and all that. So even let him jerk out her enchantment at his own bum's cost. But as for any whipping of me, I deny and pronounce it flat and plain." The second great classic, coming in at 600 pages, which is worth your time investing into, is the brilliant, suspenseful and thrilling Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. This is a book I recommend to everyone, and almost everyone enjoys it. It deals with a mysterious woman in white, and also the story of two sisters, the younger of whom has an uncanny resemblance to a woman in white that one of our narrators, Walter Hartwright, meets early in the book. This is a tale of betrayal and of intrigue, of suspense, and of a race against time. This book will have you gripped from start to finish. Listen to just this section of it. "I had now arrived at that particular point of my walk where 4 roads meet. The road to Hampstead, along which I had returned, the road to Finchley, the road to West End, and the road back to London. I had mechanically turned in this latter direction and was strolling along the lonely high road, idly wondering, I remember, what the Cumberland young ladies would look like, when, in one moment, every drop of my blood was brought to a stop by the touch of a hand laid lightly and suddenly on my shoulder from behind me." The third great classic on our list deals with childhood. It captures the nostalgia and wonderment that we all remember from our childhood. It captures the loves and affections we have specifically for our family, for our father, our mother, for our brothers and sisters, but also the annoying habits of other relations who come into our family. But in this story, our main protagonist, she grows up to a young lady where these affections and loyalties are put to the test. The book we're talking about is George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss, one of the most elegantly written pieces of literature that I could recommend. Maggie Tulliver loves her father, but he's given to going to law to get his rights, particularly against Mr. Wakeham, who he thinks is a scoundrel of the First Order. Maggie wants to remain loyal to him and to Tom, but later she falls in love with an enemy of Tom's, and her loyalties are put to the test. This book is romantic, moving, full of pathos, and captures the innermost thoughts of youth like no other book does. Let me just read you an excerpt at the beginning of this book. Now I can turn my eyes towards the mill again and watch the unresting wheel sending out its diamond jets of water. That little girl is watching it too. She's been standing on just the same spot at the edge of the water ever since I paused on the bridge. And that queer white cur with the brown ear seems to be leaping and barking in ineffectual remonstrance with the wheel. Perhaps he is jealous because his playfellow in the beaver bonnet is so rapt in its movement. It is time the little playfellow went in, I think, and there is a very bright fire to tempt her. The red light shines out under the deepening grey of the sky. It is time, too, for me to leave off resting my arms on the cold stone of this bridge. The fourth great classic on our list comes in at 900 pages, but will fly by if you read it faster than almost any other book you have written. This book has it all. It has thrill, it has suspense, it has mystery, it has deep, hard revenge, it has crime and wickedness, it has treasure, it has highwaymen, it has false imprisonment, and that book is the great Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, the lion of French literature. This book starts with Edmond Dantes on his wedding day getting arrested for a crime that he not only did not commit, but he doesn't even know what he's supposed to have done, and is sent to the notorious Chateau d'If, an island prison out in the bay near Marseille. But it's a story that progresses from a man he meets inside the prison and his eventual rise to the top in quest for revenge on those who put him there. Listen to this thrilling excerpt. But beneath my fingers, as if by magic, in proportion as the fire ascended, I saw yellowish characters appear on the paper. I grasped it in my hand, put out the flame as quickly as I could, lighted my taper in the fire itself, and opened the crumpled paper with inexpressible emotion, recognizing, when I had done so, that these characters had been traced in mysterious and sympathetic ink, only appearing when exposed to the fire. Nearly 1/3 of the paper had been consumed by the flame. It was that paper you read this morning. Read it again, Dantes, and then I will complete for you the incomplete words and unconnected sense. Well, do you comprehend now? It is Sparta's gold. No list would be complete without a grand love story, and our fifth book, at 800 pages, is one of the greatest tragic love stories you can ever hope to read. It has a vast sweep, a great array of characters which all revolve around the palaces of Russia and two main characters, Vronsky and Anna Karenina. This is one of the best works of literature you will ever read. The magnificence and beauty of the writing is something to behold. Tolstoy gives us a slice of life, as it's often said about his works. And like I say, the two main characters are the military man cadet Vronsky and the woman whom he meets who is married, Anna Karenina. This great beauty, this great socialite who has a magnetism and charm that is almost irresistible. One can't help but almost fall in love with her oneself when reading this. On the other side of the story, there is another main character, and that is Levin. And it talks of his love, but his longing to be in the countryside of Russia rather than in the city that Vronsky and Anna Karenina inhabit. Some of the great passages of this feature the peasants of Russia going through the fields, scything in the harvest, and Levin's endeavours to elevate the life of the peasants, but also his own love life. Levin is a character you will fall in love with and never ever forget. It comes with probably one of the greatest and most moving denouements you ever get in literature, but obviously you'll have to read it to find out what that is. But first, let me just read you this scintillating passage where Vronsky first lays eyes on Anna. The trained insight of a society man enabled Vronsky with a single glance to decide that she belonged to the best society. He apologised for being in her way and was about to enter the carriage, but felt compelled to have another look at her. Not because she was very beautiful, nor because of the elegance and modest grace of her whole figure, but because he saw in her sweet face as she passed him something specially tender and kind. When he looked round, she turned her head. Her bright grey eyes, which seemed dark because of their black lashes, rested for a moment on his face as if recognising him, and then turned to the passing crowd, evidently in search of someone. In that short look, Vronsky had time to notice the subdued animation that enlivened her face and seemed to flutter between her bright eyes and a scarcely perceptible smile which curved her rosy lips. It was as if an excess of vitality so filled her whole being that it betrayed itself against her will, now in her smile, now in the light of her eyes. She deliberately tried to extinguish that light in her eyes, but it shone despite of her, in her faint smile. The sixth great book on our list is set in Regency England, with the backdrop of the Great Battle of Waterloo behind it, placing us in the year 1815. This book details the gaudy rooms of Regency high society, the machinations for personal ambition, the striving for love, the striving for influence, the cutthroat and the sweet and the pleasant. The book itself was called by its author a book without a hero, and it is the amazingly famous Vanity Fair by William Thackeray. In the book, two main characters, Becky Sharp and Amelia Sedley, graduate from Mrs. Pinkerton's School for Young Girls and enter into high society. Amelia Sedley has a proper background, and she is sweet and kind and longs for nothing than for the love of the rakish soldier George Osborne, who is quite self-centred. Becky Sharp is an orphan, but is possessed of incredible brilliance and wit and cunning, and she is determined to work her way to the top. Through the 800 pages of this book, you will meet a great cast of characters captured so brilliantly, so realistically, that you will want to go back to the Regency period of England. But this doesn't just give us the froth and sparkle of a Jane Austen, it gives us the more seedy and conniving side of the high society of Regency England. Here's a little excerpt of it. This dark presentiment also haunted Lord Steyne. He tried to lay the horrid bedside ghost in red seas of wine and jollity, and lost sight of it sometimes in the crowd and rout of his pleasures. But it always came back to him when alone, and seemed to grow more threatening with years. "I have taken your son," it said. "Why not you? I may shut you up in a prison some day like your son. I may tap you on the head tomorrow, and away go pleasure and honours, feasts and beauty, friends, flatterers, French cooks, fine horses and houses, in exchange for a prison, a keeper, and a straw mattress." And then my lord would defy the ghost which threatened him, for he knew of a remedy by which he could balk his enemy. Our seventh great classic on this list is a work that's overlooked quite often because of the sheer brilliance of the other books written by this author. But in this book, we get an insight into human character, specifically selflessness, because the main character is a selfless individual. He does not have great ambition. He doesn't harbour grudges against people. Yet all the other characters in the book are based on the materialistic ideals of modern society, albeit modern society as created in the 19th century. The thing about this book is that it's amazingly resonant to this day, and the book itself is The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is about 600 pages long, and it follows the life of Prince Mishkin, who at the beginning comes from an asylum in Switzerland and is returned back into Russian high society. And how he can't fit, because the way Russian aristocracy has developed society is so that a good person cannot succeed, and that someone with truly Christian values or good ethics looks like an idiot if they try to keep to them rather than adopt the vices and machinations that get a person ahead in their ambitious lives. Let me just read an excerpt from this. "What sort of face is it?" "It's practically the minute before death," Mishkin began with perfect readiness, carried away by his memories and to all appearance instantly forgetting everything else. "That moment when he's just mounted the ladder and has just stepped onto the scaffold. Then he glanced in my direction. I looked at his face and I understood it all. But how can one describe it? I do wish that you or someone would paint it. It would be best if it were you. I thought at the time that a picture of it would do good. You know, one has to imagine everything that has been before. Everything. He has been in prison awaiting execution for at least a week. He's been reckoning on the usual formalities, on the sentence being forwarded somewhere for sentence and signature and not coming back again for a week. But now, by some chance, this business was over sooner. At 5 o'clock in the morning, he was asleep. It was at the end of October. At 5 o'clock, it was still cold and dark. The superintendent of the prison came in quietly with the guard and touched him carefully on the shoulder. He sat up, leaning on his elbow, saw the light, asked, 'What's the matter?' 'The execution is at 10 o'clock. Our eighth great classic is a 600-page book which is not the easiest to read, but is perhaps one of the most rewarding reads you will ever go through. It's a book that borders on the sublime and introduces us to a narrator who says, "Call me Ishmael," meaning a wanderer and an outcast. The book, of course, is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Our narrator, who asks us to call him Ishmael or a wanderer, joins a whaling ship in Nantucket and heads out into the frigid Atlantic waters, where they're endeavouring to catch whales. He's under the captaincy of Captain Ahab, who has a different reason for being out at sea. There is only one whale that Captain Ahab wants, and it's not for financial gain, it's to settle a personal vendetta. The whale, of course, is Moby Dick, a feared and fearsome sperm whale which has an almost supernatural intelligence and attacks and sinks whaling vessels in one attack, injuring Ahab, who was sworn to kill and get revenge on this whale. And the idea of obsession today even has the phrase from Moby Dick, killing one's white whale. The book itself borders on the sublime. The writing is some of the most poetic prose you will ever read. Some of it is taxing, some of it is arduous, but trust the narrative. By reading these arduous pieces, you feel the ardour of work at the sea. You feel the isolation in the grass, in the grand, raw and wild ocean. And at the end of it, there is something infinitely human that comes out of it, and you have to finish the book in order to experience it. Just listen to this piece of writing. But even stripped of these supernatural surmisings, there was enough in the earthly make and incontestable character of the monster to strike the imagination with unwonted power. For it was not so much his uncommon bulk that so much distinguished him from other sperm whales, but, as was elsewhere thrown out, a peculiar snow-white wrinkled forehead and a high pyramidical white hump. These were his prominent features, the tokens whereby even in the limitless, uncharted seas he revealed his identity at a long distance to those who knew him. Our ninth great classic to consider was the third novel written by this author and was received with great affection and enthusiasm by the public. It tells the story of a young boy and girl and their mother on the death of their father, and how they have to make their way in a cold, unforgiving and unjust world. It is populated throughout by some of the most vividly drawn characters who will make you laugh and who capture the sheer malevolence, indignity, dirtiness, seediness and wickedness of Victorian London and many of the institutions around Britain. The book, of course, is Charles Dickens' Nicholas Nickleby, not one everyone has tried to read. Nicholas tries initially to make his way by joining a school, a private school, to educate the pupils, but actually the pupils are not taught by the terrible Wackford Squeers head teacher. Rather, they're just there to fleece the money from their parents to line the pockets of teachers. Dickens uses this occasion to really point out the injustices and the ineptitude of private schools and how they are truly run. Also, the horrible cruelty that is imposed on young children. Dickens always championed young children. He himself knew what it was like to be abused as a child, being forced to work ridiculous hours, again, just for commerce. But what's great is how he paints a London which really is what the imagination of Victorian London is for everybody. So vivid was his description. He fills the book with caricatures and grotesques and humours who, though not fully realised as realistic characters, are nonetheless people you will identify with, who you will know from day-to-day life. And there are some of the best baddies and crooks and villains and just weird characters in here. You've got the Kenwigs, you've got the Crummels, you've got the Whittitleys, you've got Kate's milliner, the milliner who employs Kate, Mrs. Mantellini, and just the vicissitudes that these two go through in order to provide for their mother, and how Dickens gives voice to the oppressed, to the downtrodden of Victorian society, as he points out the horrible conditions they all had to endure, which those in the higher echelons were either unaware of or didn't care about. Dickens made people pay attention. Here's a passage right from the beginning of the book. It is extraordinary how long a man may look among the crowd without discovering the face of a friend, but it is no less true. Mr. Nickleby looked and looked till his eyes became sore as his heart, but no friend appeared. And when, growing tired of the search, he turned his eyes homeward, he saw very little there to relieve his weary vision. A painter who has gazed too long upon some glaring colour refreshes his dazzled sight by looking upon a darker and more sombre tint, but everything that met Mr. Nickleby's gaze wore so black and gloomy a hue that he would have been beyond description refreshed by the very reverse of the contrast. The 10th great classic work on this list is unique from all the others, and when I tell you what it is, please don't rush on because you've prejudged it. This work is not a novel but a collection of plays, and when you read them, if you give them your time, you will develop a lust for language. You will develop a wonder of words. You will behold what is truly noble. You will yearn to be able to speak. You will be mystified by the pure sorcery of the rhythm and cadence of the words in this. What am I talking about? I'm talking about this volume here. This is Shakespeare's histories. All of the histories, which are normally those things to do with the kings or emperors of the past, combined make about 600 pages. They also make some of the most beautiful reading. Do not be alarmed by Shakespeare. Do not think you cannot understand. The histories are the easiest to understand. They talk of knights. They talk of battles. They talk of kings. They talk of villains. They talk of murder. They talk of wenching. They talk of infighting. They talk of ambition. Anything and everything that makes up a human, the histories capture, but they capture it in the most sublime language. And if you really want to appreciate literature and language, go to my video on what is iambic pentameter, or iambic pentameter explained, because this is the rhythm that Shakespeare writes in and gives us some of the most beautiful, beautiful speeches and words ever spoken in the English language. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Let us sit on the ground and speak of dead kings. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. Can I do all this and not get the crown? Tut, if 'twere further off, I'd pluck it down. Shakespeare is a magician, and if you just read the histories, you would realise language is the most precious and valuable thing in all of existence. I hope you've enjoyed that list of 10 long classics which are very much worth your time reading. Tell me below which one appeals to you the most. Until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you read.